of any of the G20 or the G7 in recent years. We've got the second biggest offshore wind sector in the world. We want to quadruple that by 2030. And the reason we are not reliant on Russian gas is precisely because we have focused on clean energy in our country. And that's what we want to see delivered across the rest of the world as well.
Sir Oliver Hill.
My right honourable friend will be aware of the key role of marine conservation in tackling climate change. And he'll be aware that damage to the seabed and also to the plants that are there can be very damaging to the battle against climate change. With that in mind, would he look at the bill presented yesterday by my right honourable friend for Epsom and Ewell, supported by me and others, which would ban bottom trawling, because that would mean that we could really tackle this better?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to look at the bill that he refers to, of course. But as we know from the IPCC report, that if global warming continues at current rates, by 2030, 2070, we could be in a position where a third of our plant and animal species are extinct.
Secretary Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this House stands in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and his COP presidency now faces an utterly changed context with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The crisis shows how global dependence on fossil fuels can support the most tyrannical regimes. This is a war underwritten by Russia's oil and gas. Does he agree with me, therefore, that the best route to protect our energy and national security and undermine the power of Putin is not by increasing our dependence on fossil fuels, whose price is set in the international market, but by supercharging the drive to renewables, nuclear and energy efficiency, so all countries, including our own, have clean, cheap, homegrown power?
Mr. Speaker, no one can be failed to be moved by the appalling suffering of the citizens of Ukraine, including, of course, children, and they are enduring unimaginable conditions, and our hearts and thoughts are very much with them. He makes an important point in terms of a clean energy transition. I've said in the past that what we want to see is a managed clean energy transition. That's why we put forward the North Sea transition deal, and of course this government is focused on renewables, on nuclear, on hydrogen.
Mr. Speaker, an essential part of becoming less dependent on fossil fuels is to reduce our demand for gas by making more progress on energy efficiency. On its own, insulating the 18 million drafty homes in our country would cut our imports of gas by 15%, double the amount we import from Russia. In his role holding government departments to account on net zero, will he now persuade the Treasury and other colleagues that it's the time to finally get serious and invest at scale in the national programme to upgrade Britain's homes that Labour has long been calling for?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, is right, of course, that buildings are responsible for 20% of emissions in the UK, and we did set out in our heat and building strategy the aim to ensure that we insulate homes, and he's right. That is how you reduce emissions, but also reduce costs for individuals and businesses.
Mark Fletcher.
Question number 5, please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 5, 6, 7, 13 and 15 together. At COP26, almost 200 countries agreed to the historic Glasgow Climate Pact, which keeps alive the aim of limiting average global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. At the Munich Security Conference last month, John Kerry, the US Special Envoy for Climate, referred to COP26 as perhaps the best, if not one of the best COPs, saying it did more than Paris. It really gave life to Paris. We now need to ensure that these commitments are acted upon.
Mark Fletcher.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. Given the horrible events that we are witnessing in Ukraine at the moment, does my right honourable friend agree that actually the move from COP towards more renewables is more important than ever, and in particular for our European neighbours, they need to weed themselves off Russian gas and oil for the good of our world?
Mr. Speaker, I think there is a lot of consensus in this House that the UK's significant expansion of renewables over the past decade, particularly the offshore wind sector, has reduced our dependence on gas. And my honourable friend is right that we need to continue to push out on this to ensure our domestic energy security. As I said, more on renewables, more on nuclear, more on hydrogen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now more than ever, we've got to make sure we've got security of supply. So following COP26, would my right honourable friend agree that investing in technologies like new nuclear, which is so important for constituencies like mine and the wider Lancashire area, is very important.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. When I was Business Secretary, we set out our 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and in that we made very clear that we were going to be supporting nuclear. We followed that through, and I know that he will particularly have welcomed the funding that is going towards new SMR technology.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with the brilliant people at Rolls-Royce who are working on small modular reactors, and that will help fill the gap between fossil fuel and renewable energy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that more investment into nuclear power will help combat global climate change, but more importantly, help our desperate constituents who are having to choose between eating or heating right now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I very much share his view. Nuclear has to be part of our clean energy mix. We are investing, as he has acknowledged, in SMR technology through Rolls-Royce, and it also provides an export opportunity for the UK and the creation of jobs in our industrial heartlands.
Alexander Stafford.
Speaker, my right honourable friend set out what steps he has taken to ensure the Glasgow Climate Pact starts delivering this year, 2022.
Well, Mr. Speaker, delivery of the Glasgow Climate Pact is very much the focus for this year. As I said, in Glasgow, we did manage to keep 1.5 alive, but its pulse is weak. And this will only strengthen if governments honour their commitments. Since COP, I've engaged with ministers from over 30 countries, and I will continue to engage and press them to honour their commitments.
Aaron Smith.
The credibility of the presidency depends on action at home. Next month, the Advanced Skills Construction Centre in my constituency will host my apprenticeship fair. Does he agree that the jobs of the future and apprenticeships offer a credible way to take action at home? Will he support my fair, and will he answer how his government are supporting the jobs of the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, apprenticeships, of course, are a big focus for this government. We have created many hundreds of thousands over the past years. And yes, ensuring apprenticeships in green technologies is absolutely vital, and I wish her well with her fair.
Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, would you and the Minister agree that if we're taking COP26 seriously, it's about what we do locally as well as what we do nationally? Is he aware that the House of Commons Commission and the contract for the Holocaust Memorial Building, which I fully support, has actually gone to a company, rather than putting all the materials and the waste and all that traffic on the river, which is easily done, they're going to put it on the contract they've chosen is going to all be on the road to snarl up London traffic and to pollute the air. Could he look at could we look at this question locally and nationally right now?
Mr. Speaker, I note the point he's made. He'll appreciate it's not part of my responsibilities, but I'm sure Mr. Speaker and other relevant colleagues will have heard his call for action on this issue.
Shadow Minister Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week's IPCC report put forward their bleakest warning yet, stating that progress on adaptation is uneven, with increasing gaps between action taken and what is needed to deal with the increasing risks. It emphasises the urgency of immediate action, concluding that half measures are no longer an option. In light of this, will the COP President outline what concrete steps have been taken since COP26 to scale up finance for adaptation, whether he will increase ambition in light of the report, and if he will commit to bring a plan to this House on how we will meet the 2025 target?
Mr. Speaker, she raises a very important point, and of course this report was a stark warning, yet again another code red, that we need to take action. I did set out in answer to earlier questions what we are doing in terms of pushing forward, particularly on finance, doubling adaptation finance, and we will ensure that by the time we get to COP27, that trajectory has moved forward.
Top Biddles, listed back up.
Number one, please.
President.
Mr. Speaker, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine is at the forefront of all our minds, as are the brave and courageous people of Ukraine, who are having to defend themselves from the despicable onslaught of Putin's forces. and supporting and standing with Ukraine is rightly our most immediate priority. But as the IPCC report earlier this week highlighted, the chronic threat of climate change has not gone away, and that is why we need to redouble our efforts in ensuring that countries deliver on their commitments set out in the Glasgow Climate Pact.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the path to net zero not only creates clean, green energy, but also makes us energy resilient, which will further reduce our need for imported oil and gas?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend she's entirely right, and I can tell her that when I speak to governments around the world, they have seen the UK as a leader in a clean energy transition, in my recent visit, for instance, to Vietnam, they were particularly keen to understand the revenue mechanisms we put in place to ensure more private sector investment in our offshore wind sector.
Patrick Reddy.
Speaker, what steps is he taking to ensure that the voices of environmental and human rights defenders are heard in the COP process and that their safety and security is protected worldwide?
Mr. Speaker, at COP26 we ensured, indeed lead up to COP26, we ensured that the voices of civil society and youth were heard, and I'm sure this is something that all future COPs will want to ensure as well.
Claire Coutinho.
The energy security of Europe is clearly going to be central to the security of us all. I commend the President for his tireless work to promote the growth of renewable energies across Europe. Could you update the House with his plans to press ahead with the nuclear agenda, in particular with our allies in Europe as well?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thankfully the UK is not reliant on Russian oil and gas, and that's because we've invested significantly in renewables and we will continue to do so. But she makes an important point. Every country needs to think about a managed clean energy transition and security of supply.
Richard Holden.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The next generation of jobs and apprenticeships are going to be delivered in the industries that the President talks about. Would he praise those employers reaching out to young people at my apprenticeships fair just a few weeks ago in concert about all the work that they're doing to deliver great jobs in these high-tech sectors for the next generation?
Mr. Speaker, employers in the private sector are going to be absolutely vital to the transition to net zero, and of course I commend all the employers who attended his apprenticeship fair, and indeed employers across the country for everything they're doing to ensure a clean transition by 2050 in our country.
Live down.
Many countries will be considering how they can reduce their dependence on Russia for energy supplies. Will my right honourable friend use his presidency to help other countries ensure that they can diversify their supplies and use renewable energy with British assistance?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a really important point. In fact, we are working with developed country partners to see how we can support other nations make that transition to clean energy and reduce their dependence on fossil fuels.
Mr. Speaker, does the President recognise that consideration for biodiversity loss needs to be given parity in the government's plans for environmental protection?
Your Excellency, we generally do not allow applause in this chamber. But on this occasion, the House quite rightly wants to demonstrate our respect and support for your country and its people in the most difficult of times. Before we start, I would like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions, Prime Minister. I call Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was in Warsaw and Tallinn
reaffirming our commitment to NATO and our solidarity with Ukraine. Putin has gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around. If instead Putin doubles down, then so shall we, further ratcheting up economic pressure and supporting Ukraine with finance, with weapons and with humanitarian assistance. Today, the Disasters and Emergency Committee is launching its Ukraine appeal, and every pound donated by the British people will be matched by the government, starting with £20 million. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Graham Stewart.
Men, women, children, terrorised, murdered and maimed. Indiscriminate munitions unleashed on civilian populations with a total disregard both for international law and human life. Can my right honourable friend assure the House that we will accelerate the transfer of military supplies to the Ukrainians and maintain this country's proud record of support for refugees fleeing war?
I thank my right honourable friend, and I hope I can say that I speak for the whole House when I spoke to President Vladimir Zelensky this morning, and I told him, Mr. Speaker, that we would indeed do everything we can to accelerate our transfer of the shipments that he describes, of the weapons that he describes. And the UK, as the House knows, was the first European country to send such defensive weaponry, and we are certainly determined to do everything we can to help Ukrainians fleeing the theatre of conflict.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very glad the Ambassador is here so he can hear me repeat what I've said to him privately on a number of occasions, and that is that this House and this country stand united in our support for the Ukrainian people in the face of Russian aggression. And we're all appalled by the shocking footage that's emerged over the last few days. We must stand up to Putin and those who prop up his regime. Mr. Speaker, Roman Abramovich is the owner of Chelsea Football Club and various other high-value assets in the United Kingdom. He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices. Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases at this stage. But what I can say, and I stand, Mr. Speaker, by what I've said in the House and what we've put on the record. But be in no doubt that the actions that we've already taken, that this House has already taken, are having an effect in Moscow. And by exposing the ownership of properties of companies in the way that we are, by sanctioning 275 individuals, already a further 100 last week, the impact is being felt. And what we will publish in addition, Mr. Speaker, is a full list of all those associated with the Putin regime. Of course, we have already announced sanctions on Putin and Lavrov themselves. I can tell the House that they will have heard what the President of the United States had to say last night. The vice is tightening on the Putin regime, and it will continue to tighten.
Keir Starmer.
I hear what the Prime Minister says and the way in which he puts it, and I hope that may mean we'll see some action in the near future. Last week, Putin summoned to the Kremlin the cronies who prop up his regime. They dipped their hands in the blood of Putin's war. Among them was Igor Shuvalov, Putin's former Deputy Prime Minister. Shuvalov owns 2 flats, not 5 minutes' walk from this House. They're worth over £11 million. He is on the EU sanctions list, but he's not on the UK sanctions list. When will the Prime Minister sort this out?
Mr. Speaker, I think the House should be proud of what we have done already, and I can tell him that there is more to be done, and thanks to the powers that this House and this government has taken, we can sanction any individual, any company connected with the Putin regime. And this government was amongst the first in Europe to ban Aeroflot, Mr. Speaker, from our skies. This government led the way last week in banning the use of SWIFT, Mr. Speaker. And if he talked to any of our European partners, he would understand the leading role the UK has already played and the impact that those sanctions are already having in Moscow. And as I've told him, the squeeze is growing and it will continue to grow on the Putin regime.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I support the measures that have been taken so far. The ownership of Shuvalov's flats is registered under Sova Real Estate, which is actually owned by Shuvalov and his wife. We only know which oligarch lurks beneath that shell company because of the information obtained and disclosed by Alexei Navalny. Navalny, of course, was poisoned by the Russian state, and he now sits in a Putin jail. Transparency is essential to rooting out corruption. It should be built into our law, but it's not. And I'm ashamed that we only know about Shuvalov's Westminster flats because a dissident risked his life. Is the Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat that the UK, of course, is doing everything that we can to expose ill-gotten Russian loot. And this has been something that we've been working on for a long time. That we actually were the first to impose sanctions on those who who are guilty for the poisoning of Alexei Navalny that he mentions. But what we are bringing forward now is the exposure of the ownership of properties in London and across the whole of the UK in a way that has not been possible before, and that I believe will continue to tighten the noose around Putin's regime. But be in no doubt, it was the UK, Mr. Speaker, that led the way on putting sanctions on the Russian central bank, on putting sanctions on Russian banks altogether, and I'm afraid that we're still out in advance of several of our friends and partners. We want them to go further. I believe that they will, and we will continue to put pressure, Mr. Speaker, ineluctable pressure on the Putin regime.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister refers to the long overdue economic crime bill, which, to be clear, we support and will vote through on Monday with speed. The key plank to that bill is a register of who truly owns property in the United Kingdom. But it doesn't come into force for existing owners like Shuvalov until 18 months after the bill passes. At best, that's autumn 2023. Far too long for the Ukrainian people. Why are we giving Putin's cronies 18 months to quietly launder their money out of the UK property market and into another safe haven?
Mr. Speaker, the impact of what the UK is doing and the impact of and I think the whole House should be proud of what we have done, because we have led the way on this. We led the way on SWIFT, we led the way on Aeroflot, we led the way on freezing the assets of banks. And if he asks about the speed of results, Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that on Thursday, the Russian stock market fell by $250 billion worth of assets that were wiped off. The ruble fell by about 40%. We're now in the third day, Mr. Speaker, in which the Russian stock market has not been able to open. That is thanks to the package of global sanctions, Western sanctions, that the UK has led in enforcing on the Putin regime. And he should acknowledge that.
Stop.
I have acknowledged it, and I do again. What I'm offering is support to speed this up. On Monday, the Prime Minister knows he has the House with him when this economic crime bill goes through. We could do this on Monday at speed, and I think the whole House would welcome that. So it's an invitation to work together, Prime Minister. The Business Department published a white paper this week. It rightly sets out that the UK's companies register is being exploited to further the interests of the UK's enemies to help them move stolen money into the West. But the same department, on the very same day, published an economic crime bill which did nothing to address this, leaving Companies House untouched and still exploited. So will the Prime Minister work with us to amend the bill on Monday to include the most basic reforms like identity checks for directors?
As I've said, Mr. Speaker, we are bringing forward at an accelerated pace measures to whip aside the veil of anonymity of those who own assets in this country and those who own property in this country. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we are going to be publishing a list of all those, Mr. Speaker, who have assets that are related to the Putin regime. I'm delighted by the support that the Right Honourable Gentleman is offering. If we can work together to make sure that we strengthen and accelerate the package, then all the better.
Mr. Speaker, we will work in that spirit and bring forward amendments on Monday to try and achieve all the ends that I've identified in these questions. And I think this can be voted through on Monday at speed with the full support of the House. And I'm very pleased that we can show that unity with the Ambassador here watching us. In this week of darkness, we have seen glimmers of hope in the resolve of Ukraine, in the unity of our allies, and in the bravery of Russian protesters. They remind us that the Russian people are not our enemy. They are the victims of thieves who've stolen their wealth and stolen their chance of democracy. For too long, Britain has been a safe haven for stolen money. Putin thinks that we're too corrupted to do the right thing and put an end to it. Does the Prime Minister agree that this House and this country stands united in our support for Ukraine, and now is the time to sanction every oligarch and crack open every shell company so we can prove Putin wrong?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why this government has brought forward the unprecedented measures that we have. And I know that the whole House will agree with me that nothing we do in rooting out corruption and corrupt money in London or any other capital should for 1 minute, and I want to agree with him very strongly, should for 1 minute distract from where the true blame for this crisis lies, which is wholly and exclusively and entirely with Vladimir Putin and his regime. And I'm glad that the benches opposite are resolved as we are that Putin must fail in his venture, and that we must ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we protect a sovereign, free and independent Ukraine. And that is what we are going to do. And with the unity of this House, Mr. Speaker, with the continued heroism and resolve of the Ukrainian people, which is so amazing, that we've seen over the last few days, and with the unity of the West that we are seeing, which I think has also taken aback President Putin, I've no doubt at all, Mr. Speaker, that he will fail and that we will succeed in protecting Ukraine.
Hill Parish. It's you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I, first of all, say how brave the Ukrainian people are, and they have our full support across the whole House. Can I also commend the Prime Minister and the Government for the excellent actions we have taken so far. Ukraine is very much the breadbasket of the world, and it grows much wheat. And so therefore, Prime Minister, I think we need to make sure there is food security and also security of global food supply. So would the Prime Minister agree with me that we need also to look to our production in this country to make sure that we can maintain good standard of food production and enhance our food production in order to keep good food and affordable food for the future?
Yes, my honourable friend knows whereof he speaks, Mr. Speaker. He is a great advocate of UK food and farming, and that's why we're increasing the Farming Investment Fund to £48 million. We have a massive opportunity, particularly for UK fruit and vegetables.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join you in welcoming the Ukrainian ambassador to our proceedings? Mr. Speaker, with every passing hour, the world is witnessing the horrors of Putin's war in Ukraine. In Kherson, a family of 5, a mother, her parents, her 6-year-old daughter and her baby son were murdered in cold blood by Russian troops. In the same city, A 12-year-old boy watched his mother die as he desperately attempted to save her from the rubble of her own home. These are war crimes happening in Europe right now. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. And one day soon, Putin must face justice in The Hague. Mr. Speaker, to prosecute Putin and his regime, the full range of war crime charges need to be used, including the crime of aggression by a state. But the UK has always refused to sign up to the prosecution of this crime in international law. Surely with Putin's crime of aggression in plain and horrific sight in Ukraine, now is the time to drop that opposition. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss this? And will he amend the UK War Crimes Act? And will he support the ICC prosecution for Putin for his crimes of aggression against the people of Ukraine?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm in principle, of course, happy to meet the right gentleman at any stage, but I can tell him that what we have seen already from Vladimir Putin's regime in the use of the munitions that they have already been dropping on innocent civilians, Mr. Speaker, in my view, already fully qualifies as a war crime. And I know that the ICC prosecutor is already investigating, and I'm sure the whole House will support that.
In Blackford.
I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and let's work together across this House to make sure that Putin is prosecuted, that he is held to account. Mr. Speaker, just as we seek to punish and prosecute Putin for his crimes, we need to help the Ukrainian people right now. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are fleeing the horrors of this war, and they desperately need refuge and sanctuary. The UN estimates that well over 500,000 Ukrainian refugees need urgent help, most of them women and children. This is a moment for Europe to stand united in the face of Putin's war. The European Union have acted and waived all visa requirements for Ukrainian refugees. The UK government stands alone in our continent in so far refusing to do the same. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, has made clear our country stands ready to open our borders and our hearts to the people of the Ukraine, but the UK government must bring down the barriers. Will the Prime Minister join with our European partners and waive all visa requirements for the people of Ukraine who are fleeing war?
Mr. Speaker, the EU already, because of its Schengen border-free zone, has its own arrangements with Ukraine. They've differed for a long time from those of the UK. But what we do have is a plan, Mr. Speaker, to be as generous as we possibly can to the people of Ukraine, and the numbers that will come just under our family reunion scheme could be in the hundreds of thousands, to say nothing of the special new path that we're opening up for those coming, the humanitarian path, Mr. Speaker, that is also uncapped. And I think that's the right thing to do. What we won't do, Mr. Speaker, is simply abandon all checks. We don't think that that is sensible, particularly in view of the security concerns, the reasonable security concerns about people coming from that theatre of war.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the 28th of July last year, every Labour councillor in Bury voted in favour of Andy Burnham's plan to impose a 493 square mile clean air charging zone upon my constituents and the residents of Greater Manchester. The Mayor's plan, a tax on jobs and opportunity, is based upon flawed data and should be scrapped. Does my right honourable friend agree?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and as somebody who once had to deal with a badly thought out low emission zone before, it is totally wrong to impose measures thoughtlessly that damage business and don't do very much to protect clean air. And I think the Mayor of Manchester has done the wrong thing, and I'm glad that we're delaying. And I congratulate my honourable friend and other local Conservative MPs in the Manchester area who have shown common sense, Mr. Speaker.
Roberts.
My Wales-based constituent works for the British International School in the Ukraine. The school employs 60 British citizens, most of whom thankfully escaped via a bus over the weekend. Now, I heard the Prime Minister's response earlier on to my colleague from the SNP, the leader of the SNP. But given the lack of a humanitarian corridor, 173 Ukrainian colleagues from that school are stuck in Kiev and Dnipro and ineligible for the Home Office's humanitarian sponsorship pathway due to the school being domiciled in the Ukraine. Wales aspires to be a nation of sanctuary, Our neighbours in Ireland have waived all visa requirements for 3 years. Why won't he allow us to provide the same humanitarian welcome?
I thank her very much, and I understand. Obviously, I know the whole House will want to help the 173 that she mentions in Ukraine. I think the arrangements that we have are right, and they will be very generous, and they already are very generous indeed. And I think the House should be proud, by the way, of what the UK has already done to take vulnerable people. I think we've taken more vulnerable people since 2015 fleeing theatres of conflict than any other country in Europe.
Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The nurses and doctors working at Warrington Hospital in my constituency provide selfless care for families living in some of the most deprived areas of England, where life expectancy is 12 years lower than that of the national average. At the same time, population has expanded, with thousands of new homes being built in Warrington, putting pressure on services, particularly at the General Hospital. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that tackling health inequalities is key to levelling up? And will he support my campaign for a new hospital in Warrington?
Mr. Speaker, and I know that this government is building a record number of hospitals, the total of 48 that we're building across the country. I am forbidden, unfortunately, from preempting the application process that I know his wonderful hospital is going through, but I'm wishing him every possible success.
Judith Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, the situation in Ukraine continues to appall most of the world and shames the rest, and importantly highlights the need to break our economic dependency both on Russia and on China. Does the Prime Minister agree that our national security must be protected and our food, energy, cyber and national infrastructure must be secure both now and in the future from hostile governments? Specifically, will he commit to a real hydrogen strategy that both industry and trade unions like the GMB are calling for by doubling the hydrogen production target for 2030?
Yes, I thank her very much. I think a very far-sighted question, and that's exactly what we should be doing. And we are moving to much more energy resilience and self-reliance. I think it was a shame that the party opposite cancelled so much of our nuclear power whilst they were in, or failed to develop it, Mr. Speaker. But I think the agenda that she is setting is absolutely right, including hydrogen.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last September, my constituent Dylan Rich, who was a talented 17-year-old footballer, tragically collapsed and died during a youth FA Cup game. His family and his club, the West Bridgford Colts, raised money in his honour to buy more defibrillators on site, but were faced with a VAT bill of hundreds of pounds on each life-saving device. Will my right honourable friend commit to reviewing the VAT on commercial defibrillators to bring them in line with the zero rate applied to other medical instruments? And will he meet with me, Dylan's family and his club to discuss this much-needed change?
I thank her very much, and I think the whole House will want to echo my condolences to Dylan's friends and family. And she raises a very important and emotive issue. Defibrillators at the moment are bought through voluntary contributions and donated to charities that may be eligible for VAT relief, Mr. Speaker. But I'm very happy to meet with her to discuss the matter further.
Masterson.
Will the Prime Minister instruct the Conservative Party to give to Ukrainian humanitarian causes the £2 million they've accepted from Lyubov Chanyukin? This includes £80,000 referred to in data released today by the Electoral Commission. Now, I know he doesn't want to tar everyone with Russian links with the same brush, and neither do I. But leaked documents... They might want to listen to the question, Mr. Speaker. Leaked documents show that Vladimir Chanyukin received $8 million from a Russian member of Parliament, an ally of Putin, who was later sanctioned by the United States. Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity for the Conservative Party and for the Prime Minister to end the suspicion of conflicts of interest with Putin whilst showing solidarity with the Ukrainian people.
it is absolutely vital, Mr. Speaker, if we are to have a successful outcome in what we are trying to do collectively, united with Ukraine, that we demonstrate that this is not about the Russian people, Mr. Speaker. This is about the Putin regime.
To Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that choices always have consequences? Putin has chosen. He has chosen to inflict death and destruction on the people of Ukraine and must be made to pay. But others, including those in the Russian military and Russian oligarchs, could still choose to be on the right side of history. Will my right honourable friend and other world leaders tell them to make the right choice and to make it soon, because in this conflict, time is life?
I think my right honourable friend has made a very powerful and important point, and I do hope that those who have any links with the Putin regime, whatever, anybody, any so-called oligarchs, all those who are in any way associated with their regime, take this opportunity, as some brave individuals already have, to dissociate themselves from this barbaric invasion.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, in a letter to the Prime Minister, I outlined that over 500,000 people in the UK are immunocompromised, and to them the idea of living with COVID is frightening, and many charities such as the MS Society are not reassured by the government's lifting of restrictions around free testing and isolation. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that in order to protect this group, free COVID-19 testing must continue and include their families and friends, as well as any unpaid carers, so that they can really be allowed to live with COVID?
Prime Minister.
I thank, and as I said to her, I think last week, it is absolutely essential that those who are immunocompromised, the clinically extremely vulnerable, continue to have access to free testing and all the therapies and antivirals that they need.
Close question, Bob Seeley.
Well, please, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for his question. We're carefully reviewing responses to our recent consultation on a range of legislative proposals to counter state threats, including foreign agents registration. We will update Parliament in due course.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Ukrainian ambassador. Dobry den, drug moi, уважаемый посол, дякую вашему народу. Slava Ukraina, Slava Ukraina. Okay.
The benefit of the rest of the House, please.
I just said thank you to him, and thank you, sir. Key oligarchs enforce the Kremlin's hybrid conflict. In Britain, one of its aims is to ensure safe passage for money flows offshore, whilst law firms intimidate into silence those who would investigate, be it the media or even the National Crime Agency. Does the Prime Minister understand that this is how state corruption happens, and this is systemic, planned subversion? Does he realise the seriousness of what's been happening to the law firms and the finance companies in recent years?
I think he's raising a very important point, and the law firms in this country are regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. They were reminded on the 23rd of February of the need to comply with sanctions regulations, legislation, and there are regular checks to ensure that they are doing so. They have responsibilities under that regime to safeguard the UK and to protect the reputation of the United Kingdom legal services industry, and clearly they will face sanctions if they fail to do so.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Putin is the only enemy, but I do feel ashamed. The United Kingdom signed the Budapest Accord in 1994, guaranteeing the territorial integrity of Ukraine. 23 men who once sat on these benches gave their lives for plucky little Belgium. They have shields down that end. 22 did the same for Poland. They have shields down this end. And we're not guaranteeing the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We're not even, I don't want war, nobody wants war, but we're not even
sanctioning Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defence minister, yet, nor Igor Osipov, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, or Uzmanov, Sechin, Peskov, Abramovich, Roldugin, or the members of the Russian Duma who voted for this war. Why don't we use parliamentary privilege to get this out there so the lawyers can't attack the sanctions that we must surely bring rapidly today?
Mr. Speaker, I hear him, and I know that the whole House will understand his feelings and his frustration that no country in the West is going directly to the support of the Ukrainians with direct military assistance, and that is a reality that we simply have to accept, because the consequences of a direct confrontation between the UK and Russia would be, I think, and indeed other Western countries and Russia, would not be easy to control. And if I can repeat the point I made earlier, I think they would play directly into Putin's narrative. That this is about, he says it's about him versus the West, he says it's about him versus NATO, we say it's about him versus the Ukrainian people, Mr. Speaker, and that is, I'm afraid, the difference. And as for what he says about shame, actually, I'm proud of what the UK has been able to do so far. I'm proud that we've given a lead, not just on sanctions, Mr. Speaker, where we insisted on the toughest measures, including for SWIFT, which had a dramatic effect, but also we were in the lead, Mr. Speaker, of all European countries in offering military assistance to Ukraine, and we will continue to do so. I know that he would like to go further. If I understand him correctly, he would like to go further, but I can tell the House that we are going to continue to go further, not just with military assistance, but also by tightening the vice on the Putin regime.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the tragedy in Ukraine, I know the Prime Minister also wants to slash red tape to make Britain more internationally competitive. David Cameron succeeded, but after he left, we abandoned his proven one-in, two-out regime and added billions in red tape costs instead. Last month's benefits of Brexit document repeats the mistake, vetoing one-in, two-out for another toothless regime. Can I urge the Prime Minister to step in before it's too late? Otherwise the blob will win and we will fail to deliver a key benefit of Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to say that we have a new Secretary of State for post-Brexit freedoms, and that he is driving a campaign to reform, repeal and replace outdated legislation and regulation across the board. And I don't know about the blob, Mr. Speaker. I can think of no more fearsome antagonist for the blob than my right honourable friend.
Alex Shelbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, satellite images show a 40-mile-long convoy of military hardware heading towards surrounding the cities of Ukraine. We know from Grozny what the intention of Vladimir Putin is going to be. Mr. Speaker, hundreds of thousands of people are going to be murdered in these cities. Think of in this House, everybody, think of your families, think of your neighbours, think of relatives you may have aboard. They are going to be murdered. Now, the Prime Minister has led the world in the reaction to what's going on, and I'm proud of what he's done. So can I ask my right honourable friend, I know he's probably not been to bed for a week, but can I ask him to use every second he's got remaining until this tragedy is surely going to unfold to try and prevent it from happening?
Mr. Speaker, this was, of course, one of the subjects that I discussed this morning with Volodymyr Zelensky. And I think to many people looking at it, if I just be quickly, Mr. Speaker, they will wonder why it is impossible to interrupt the progress of those tanks with airstrikes or from a drone, for instance, which we know that the Ukrainians have. Technically, unfortunately, it turns out militarily it is not as easy as you might think, Mr. Speaker. And the tragic reality is that Vladimir Putin is going to continue to grind his war machine forwards if he possibly can. That is why it is vital that we continue the military support that we are offering, and that is why it is also vital that together with the United States, with all our friends and partners in the West, we intensify and accelerate the programme of economic sanctions that is already hurting.
Deborah Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, London is known as the world's capital for corrupt Russian money. Yes, it is. £100 billion a year is awash in our country. And the scale of this corruption couldn't happen without what the Intelligence and Security Committee describe as the enablers, the lawyers, the accountants, the PR specialists, and so on, including those who challenge our brave independent journalists for identifying them. The Prime Minister didn't respond fully, I think, to the honourable members from the Isle of Wight in terms of how he will tackle the activity of these enablers who are for too long been corrupting the rule of law in our country.
I thank her. Well, with great respect, Mr. Speaker, let me repeat again, and perhaps reinforce what I said to my right honourable friend from the Isle of Wight. The legal profession, everybody involved in assisting those who wish to hide money in London, assisting corrupt oligarchs, have been set on notice that their actions are under scrutiny, and where they break the law, if they undermine the interests of this country and advance the interests of Putin's war machine, they will pay a price.
Very Kelly Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few days, I've been overwhelmed and heartened by the incredible response of my constituents to the crisis in Ukraine, with countless offers of accommodation and financial support for refugees. But the community sponsorship route is a very slow process, and it will struggle to meet the challenge that we face. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need a faster and more effective route and a better way of offering sanctuary to the refugees and the people of Ukraine than the government's current proposals?
I thank her very much. I know that the sympathies of the whole House are with her and what she's trying to do. And I talked to our Polish friends yesterday about what we can do in partnership with them to bring people directly to the UK who are fleeing to Poland. And I've set out for the House, as I know my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already, the big package of measures that we're putting in to help people fleeing Ukraine. I just want to repeat, look at the numbers we took from Afghanistan, look at the numbers of BNOs from Hong Kong, huge numbers of people that have come to the UK, and I think that we've settled 25,000 vulnerable people since 2015, which is more than any other European country, so we should be proud of our record.
Alexander Stafford.
My grandfather, Paul Krychglowa, was Ukrainian. He was deported by the Soviets to the gulags of Siberia. I am proud of my Ukrainian heritage, never more so than over the past week, when this plucky nation, the nation of my family, has stood up to the jackboot of Putin's army. I know that the world is watching the PM and our country. Will the Prime Minister give me his assurances that he will continue to look at every single possible option to ensure that Putin does the toughest range of punitive sanctions, both through financial measures, but also focusing on his inner circle?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we've begun with him and also with Sergei Lavrov. But there is no limit to what we can do on his regime, and we will continue to do that. Can I just echo what he said about our bond, our debt to the Ukrainian people? Never forget when we stood side by side with Russia in the 1940s against fascism. Mr. Speaker, there was a Ukrainian army. A Ukrainian contribution to that army was 10 million people, and they were absolutely invaluable in freedom as well.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, Scotland stands ready to welcome any fleeing Ukrainians. However, this government has failed to follow the example of the European Union of a red tape visa-free approach. Will this Prime Minister commit to an unconditional, rapid, safe and legal approach to settlement for Ukrainians fleeing this invasion? Why is he failing to do so?
Mr. Speaker, as I've explained to the House already several times, the EU has a border-free Schengen zone. It's not appropriate for them to have checks of any kind. We've got a different system. It is sensible, given the situation that we have and given the large numbers of people leaving that war zone. It's sensible to have checks and to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we know who is coming in. But what we will not do is impede Ukrainians coming in fear of their lives. This country, as I've said several times today, has a proud, proud record of taking people in. Look at what we've already done in look at the record just under my premiership. Look at what we've done to help people from Afghanistan. Look at what we've done to help the Hong Kong Chinese. She should be proud of what the UK is doing.
That ends Prime Minister's questions. Point of order. Just let the Chamber just settle down. Who was the other one?